Okay, now we're going to talk about expanded form. Expanded form, if you remember last year, expanded form is the value of each digit, and then you see that the sum of those digits is equal to the number that you're starting with. Last year, as a fourth grade student, when you were writing expanded form for the first number, which is 237 and 4/10, it probably looked something like this: 200, because there's a 2 in the hundreds place, so the value is 200, plus 30, because the 3 is in the tens place, plus 7, because the 7 is in the ones place, plus 4/10, because the 4 is in the tenths place. In fifth grade, we're going to take this and in all of these numbers, if you add them all together, they will equal the 237 and 4/10. In fifth grade, we're going to take it a little bit farther, and we're going to break down each one of those numbers. So we are starting with the 2. And the way that we write this, I always put each individual part in parentheses, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute, just so it's easier to read for myself. So I'm starting with the first digit to the left, and that's the 2. The 2 is in the hundreds place. So instead of writing 200, the way that I'm going to write it is I'm going to take the 2 and I'm going to write it times 100, because the 2 is in the hundreds place. It's like 2 copies of 100. What's in my parentheses, if you multiply 2 times 100, that equals 200. Then I'm going to do the plus sign and move my way to the next digit. The next digit is the 3. The 3 is in the tens place, so I'm going to type in times 10. 3 times 10 will give you that 30. The next digit is the 7, so I'm going to do plus the 7. The 7 is in the ones place, so I'm going to multiply the 7 times 1 because it's in the ones place. So the 2 is in the hundreds, I multiplied it by 100. The 3 is in the tens, I multiplied it by 10. And the 7 is in the ones, I multiplied it by 1. The very last digit is the 4, which is in the tenths place. There's 2 different ways that we can write this. We can either write we're going to do the 4 because it's in the tenths place. You can write it as a fraction. So we're going to do 4 times, the fraction would be 1/10. That's the place. Okay. The other way that you can write it, I'm going to copy this part, is you can write it as a decimal. And which way you write it is totally up to you. I usually prefer writing it as a fraction just because fractions are my favorite. So I prefer writing it as a fraction, but you can also write the 10th as a decimal. And the way we would write 1/10 as a decimal is that. These mean the exact same thing. It's just 2 different ways to write it. Let's try another one together. All right, so 1 and 273 thousandths. So I'm going to start with the farthest digit from the left. The farthest digit from the left to the left is the 1. And then I'm going to put it in parentheses. It's just easier to see once they're all together. So I'm going to start with the 1. The 1 is in the ones place, so I'm going to take that 1 and multiply it by 1. Then I'm going to add that to the value of the 2. The 2 is in the tenths place. So I'm going to multiply it as 2 times, and I'm going to use a fraction. I'll use a decimal on the next problem, 1/10. And the way we write 1/10 is 1 over 1/10. In the program that I'm using, it's easier to write a fraction like this. So this is your fraction bar. So the 1 is on top and the 10 is on the bottom, 1/10. Plus, now we're moving on to the 7. So the 7 is in the hundredths, so the value of it would be 7 times 100th. And then last but not least, we're going to add that to the 3. And the 3 is in the thousandths place. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 1,000th. Very good. If I were to multiply this out and then add them all together, I would get a total of 1 and 273 thousandths. Okay, let's try one with writing them as a decimal. Okay, so once again, you're starting with the very far left side. On the left side of the decimal, what comes before the decimal, those are whole numbers. So I'm just going to write them how I normally would. So I'm going to start with a 2. The 2 is in the tens place, so the value of the 2 would be like 2 times 10, and that's how you write that. Plus 5. The 5 is in the ones place, so I would write that as 5 times 1 plus 4. Now we're to the decimal places. So this is where you can either write it as a fraction, like I did in this one, or you can write it as a decimal. And I'm going to show you how to write it as a decimal in this example. So we're on the 4, and the 4 is in the tenths place. So I'm going to multiply it by 1/10. The way I write 1/10 as a decimal is 0.1. Do I have to have that 0 there? No, you don't. But I always do. I've just always gotten to the habit of it. Plus, we're on the last digit. The last digit is a 1. And the 1 is in the hundredths place. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 100th. And I'm either writing it as a fraction or as a decimal. I started writing them as a decimal, so I'm going to continue writing it as a decimal. Don't go back and forth. So if I multiplied each part that's within the parentheses and then added them together, I would get 25 and 41 hundredths. Now is a great time if you would like to try it. Try this last example on the back of your place value chart. Use your dry erase marker, pause your video, and then come back to me. All right. So if you're just coming back, let's try this. So on the left side of the decimal, we're going to start with the 4. The 4 is in the hundreds place. So I would write 4 times 100 plus, let's look at the next number. Well, the next number is a 0. If the digit is a 0, you do not have to include that, meaning you do not have to put 0 times 10. There may be times that you might see that as an option, but you do not have to write it. If it's not included, I just know that there is nothing there. The important thing, though, is that you make sure that the 4 is in the hundreds place. So I'm multiplying the 4 times the 100. So this part does not have to be included. The next digit is another 0. Don't have to include it. In the tenths place, I have another 0. In the hundredths place, I have another 0. The last digit is a 4, and it is in the thousandths place. So I'm going to write that as 4 times, and I'm going to write that as a fraction. That's in the thousandths, so we're going to write 1 thousandths. And that's all you have to do for that one. Fantastic job. Let's try standard form next.